Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is your shortcut to being well-informed. And today, we are tackling, I think, the biggest and most nervously avoided political question in the UK. Is the Labour Party quietly, very quietly, preparing the ground to rejoin the European Union Customs Union?
It's the elephant in the room, isn't it?
It really is. We're calling this deep dive the inevitable pivot. And our mission is, well, it's very focused. We've looked at recent political statements, some high-level academic research, and the latest polling data. We're going to unpack three powerful reasons why this move is becoming, well, increasingly feasible, maybe even necessary. And we'll also look at the barriers still standing in the way.
Big barriers.
Big ones. Now, if you value this kind of focus analysis, do take a moment to hit that like button, share this, and subscribe to The British Angle for clear insights every day. Okay, let's jump right in. The hook here, the thing that's really changed, is the political rhetoric. It all centers on one high-profile admission.
You're talking about David Lammy.
Exactly. The Deputy Prime Minister. He publicly acknowledged that Brexit has been, and I'm quoting, damaging to the UK economy.
Which is a huge statement in itself from someone at that level.
But he went further. He expressed an openness to rejoining the customs union, and he specifically referenced Turkey as a model.
A successful, if complex, model, I believe he said.
That's it. This isn't just a whisper anymore. This is a senior politician saying the quiet part out loud. It feels like the starting gun on the next phase of this whole debate.
It absolutely is. And what's fascinating about that comment is the strategic weight it carries. It officially shifts the debate from denying there's any damage from Brexit to actively talking about how to fix that damage.
Right.
But before we get into the politics, we should probably make sure the foundation is absolutely clear for everyone listening.
Yes, good point. Let's unpack that. We're talking about the European Union Customs Union. What exactly is it, and what's the tangible benefit it offers?
Well, the definition is actually quite simple, but its implications for trade are revolutionary, really. The Customs Union, or CU, is a trade area where all the members agree to two main things.
Okay.
First, they eliminate all tariffs between each other. That's your standard free trade agreement stuff.
Sure.
But second, and this is the really crucial part, they adopt a common external tariff, a CET.
And that's applied to all goods coming from outside the bloc.
Precisely. Uniformly. It doesn't matter if the goods enter via France or Germany, or in this scenario, the UK, the tariff is the same.
So everyone trades freely inside, and everyone uses the exact same rule book when dealing with, say, China or the US.
Exactly. And the key benefit, the reason businesses are so desperate for this, is that the CET basically eliminates the need for these incredibly complex, burdensome rules of origin checks.
Ah, and that's the bureaucracy that we hear so much about. The paperwork that can paralyze supply chains.
That's the one. It just grinds things to a halt.
Let's use a specific example our sources highlight to make this real for people. Electric vehicles, EVs.
It's a perfect illustration of the current headache. So right now, there are no tariffs on EVs traded between the UK and the EU. But the EU puts very high tariffs on Chinese-made EVs. The UK's tariffs, on the other hand, are much lower, or even zero.
And without the customs union, there's the loophole. What stops China from shipping its cars to the UK, paying our lower tariff, and then just filtering them into the EU to dodge their much higher one?
Nothing. That is the loophole. And without strict, expensive, time-consuming rules of origin checks on every single component, that arbitrage is almost impossible to stop.
But joining the customs union closes that instantly.
Instantly. Because the UK would have to apply the same high EU tariff to those Chinese EVs the moment they landed at a UK port. The problem just vanishes. The border for those goods becomes virtually invisible.
Now, you mentioned David Lammy and the Turkey model. Our sources highlighted this, but we didn't really define it. What does that mean, and why did he call it imperfect?
Well, the Turkey model is exactly why this is so politically radioactive. Turkey has a customs agreement with the EU. It gets tariff-free access to the market, which is great for them.
But there's a catch.
A huge catch. Turkey must apply the EU's common external tariff to its imports, which means it has effectively sacrificed its ability to negotiate its own independent trade deals.
So Turkey gets the economic benefit of seamless trade, but it pays a political price. It has zero say in setting the tariffs it's forced to apply.
Correct. It gains market access but loses its autonomy on trade policy. That is the imperfect part. And for the UK, if it joins the customs union without the single market, it risks becoming a regulatory rule taker on tariffs.
Which is the exact opposite of what Brexit promised.
Precisely. And that's the trade-off that Keir Starmer and his team are, I'm sure agonizing over right now.
Okay, here's where we get down to brass tacks. Our sources identify 3 core pressures pushing any future UK government toward this. Let's start with the one that gives them the most political cover, the narrative.
Reason one is that Labour is actively creating the justification for this shift. For years, they were so cautious about Brexit.
Terrified of the backlash. But now, that seems to have vanished.
It has. In recent budget speeches, in economic papers, they are directly and publicly pinning the blame for the UK's poor growth, our weak productivity, the need for tax rises.
They're pinning it squarely on the current Brexit deal.
Squarely on it. And if you're a government that identifies Brexit as the cause of the economic sickness, well, the logical remedy is some form of reversal.
Which brings us to this second and I think the most powerful pressure.
Yeah.
This absolute thirst for growth, growth, growth.
It's Keir Starmer's mantra, his #1 priority. And if they're openly admitting the current trade deal is the primary economic illness, they are logically compelled to seek the quickest cure.
And the data on this is, well, it's unavoidable, isn't it? Let's spend a moment on the academic studies our sources are citing. What's the scale of the damage they identify?
We're looking at recent papers from the National Bureau of Economic Research and the Center for European Reform, so top-tier nonpartisan institutions.
Right.
And they estimate that Brexit has caused a massive long-term reduction in the UK's gross domestic product of somewhere between 6 and 8%.
6 to 8% of GDP. Let's just pause on that. That is a staggering figure. The entire UK economy barely grew at all last year. A 6% structural loss is larger than most recessions.
It's the equivalent of losing an entire major industry overnight. It creates a structural deficit that no amount of domestic policy tweaking can possibly hope to offset.
So if your #1 priority is growth, and the data says your biggest obstacle is the trade framework,
the conclusion is inescapable. The analysis we're seeing argues that rejoining the customs union is the fastest, most certain way to immediately stimulate the growth you need to plug that 6 to 8% gap.
it's the biggest lever they can pull.
By far. But, the best economic plans often die when they hit the reality of politics. So what about public opinion? That brings us to reason 3.
Yes, the polling. What does the latest data tell us about the public appetite for a move like this?
The landscape has demonstrably shifted. A clear majority of the UK public now views Brexit as a failure. And the key findings are, well, they're decisive. 56% of the public now support the UK rejoining the European Union entirely.
A clear majority for a full reversal.
And if you narrow it down to just the customs union, which is the less radical step, you have 49% of people supporting it compared to only 19% who oppose it.
That is a massive margin. Nearly half the population for less than a fifth against. That's not a mandate for separation, it's political permission to move back towards the center.
It is. For Labour, moving towards rejoining the CU aligns them with the majority of the population. It actually gives them a political advantage against opponents like Nigel Farage, who insist on maintaining the status quo.
So the political cost of moving is now lower than the cost of standing still.
And accepting permanent economic stagnation.
Oh, wow. Okay. So we have the economic need, a growing political mandate, and a narrative providing cover. But it's not that simple. Why the continued hard public denial from Keir Starmer? What are the real barriers here?
Well, the denial is a political shield. He absolutely has to deny any immediate intention of rejoining. He has to. Otherwise, he risks reigniting the intense political turmoil that, consumed British politics for a decade.
He needs to transition the policy, not trigger a new culture war on day one.
Precisely. And beyond that, there are real concrete economic hurdles, specifically on trade policy.
The independent trade deals.
Absolutely. This is the biggest practical trade-off. Rejoining the customs union means adopting the EU's tariff, which immediately strips the UK of its power to set its own.
Which means?
It means you can no longer offer, say, the US or India low tariff access to your market in exchange for a trade deal. You're giving up your biggest negotiating tool.
A huge concession.
A massive concession, especially after all the political capital spent trying to secure those deals. You sacrifice that freedom for seamless access to the European market.
And we also have to remember the overall UK-EU relationship is still, well, it's delicate. it's often frictional.
Mm,
Throwing this huge question onto the table could destabilize the agreements we already have, like the Windsor Framework, which only just starting to settle.
exactly. The key is timing. They are waiting, I think, for the moment when the economic pressure is overwhelming and the public is fully prepared for the conversation.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We had the official denial, but then this overwhelming evidence pointing in the other direction. What is the synthesis from our source material?
I think the synthesis is that the eventual pivot appears increasingly likely. Despite all the current political posturing, the confluence of those three factors, public opinion, the acute economic pressure from that GDP drop, and the simple need for growth, it makes a return to the customs union more feasible now than at any point since Brexit.
The economic argument is just winning out.
It seems to be, and the analysis suggests this isn't about an ideological surrender, but a pragmatic, necessary move for British economic stability. It's seen as the only certain path to getting that growth they've promised. And that pragmatism is crucial for protecting the long-term prosperity of the UK.
That's a powerful and very clear conclusion. So let me leave you with a final thought to consider, based on everything we've reviewed. Given the academic proof that our current trade setup has already cost the UK up to 8% of its long-term GDP, how long can any government truly afford to prioritize political rhetoric over the immediate, proven path to recovery that rejoining the customs union offers? It's a defining question hanging over Whitehall. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. If you value this kind of clear, focused analysis, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to The British Angle. We'll see you next time.